Okay, so today we're diving into something that's, well, haunted and fascinated us for literally millennia,
Mm,
demons.
right,
But
yeah.
what is a demon, really?
Yeah.
I mean, when you peel back the layers, and how have these ideas, these figures actually shaped, our societies, our art, even how we see ourselves is pretty wild.
It really is a compelling subject. And what's fascinating is that the definition, it's just not universal at all.
Hmm.
The sources we've looked at, and we're talking ancient texts, religious doctrines, um, psychological research, even like pop culture analysis, they show this incredibly rich, complex, sometimes really contradictory picture.
Okay.
So our mission here in this deep dive is basically to unpack all these different interpretations. We want to trace how demons evolved, from being seen as these purely external evil things
Right.
to becoming these powerful metaphors for our own internal struggles.
And you, our listener, you've given us just a fantastic stack of material to work with here. So we're going to guide you through it, pull out the key nuggets, the really important stuff so you can get up to speed quickly, but, thoroughly too.
Yeah, get those aha moments going.
Exactly. So let's jump right in. I think most people assume demons are just purely
Instincts.
bad,
Yeah.
right? Purely malevolent. Is that actually true historically speaking?
That's a perfect place to start because no, absolutely not. Not always. If you look at the big picture, like across history, a lot of ancient cultures had way more nuanced views.
Nuanced tab.
We'll take ancient Mesopotamia, for instance. They talked about the Eckimu. Now, this was a kind of restless spirit,
Okay.
but it wasn't automatically evil. Often it was tied to, like, unresolved stuff with the dead, someone who died tragically, or maybe didn't get proper burial rites. Their spirit might linger. It was less about cosmic evil and more about disrupting human order, things left unfinished. Ah, okay. So, circumstantial almost, rather than pure malice. What about, say, ancient Egypt? They had such a complex world of gods and spirits.
They really did. Egyptian beliefs were, yeah, incredibly complex. They saw these spectral entities, sometimes embodying aspects of nature, sometimes human experiences. And sure, some could be harmful,
Right.
but others were protective or even like necessary for balance. Think about Set. He was the god of chaos, disorder.
Yeah, usually seen as a bad guy.
Kind of, but not just that. In their cosmology, he was actually crucial. He was the force constantly testing Mad, that's cosmic order, against Apep, the giant serpent of chaos. Without Set's disruption, Mad couldn't really be affirmed.
That's a twist.
And they also had genuinely protective figures like Bez. He was this dwarf-like god, often shown dancing or making faces, specifically to guard households and protect children from harm.
Okay.
So these beings, often hybrids, they really reflected this view of an interconnected world, natural, supernatural, where even chaotic forces could have a purpose. All right, it wasn't just good versus evil, black and white, more like a dynamic balance. So it seems like across these ancient cultures, demon could mean a lot of different things.
Exactly, a whole spectrum.
But then, as we shift focus, especially towards Western traditions, things start looking, well, quite different, don't they? More like the image many of us have today.
Yes, that's a major shift. Western traditions, especially the Judeo-Christian ones, offer a really stark contrast. Here, demons are pretty consistently understood as fallen angels.
The rebels.
Precisely. They rebelled against God, got cast out of heaven. You see this in texts like Revelation. They become these fundamental adversaries. Their whole deal is temptation, sin, moral corruption. They embody evil and chaos, actively working against humanity and God's plan. It sets up a much more adversarial relationship.
A clear battle line drawn. So that's the West. What about major Eastern religions? How do they frame these kinds of entities? Is it the same kind of battle?
Not really in the same way, no. Take Buddhism. It does acknowledge beings like Mara, the tempter, who tried to stop the Buddha from achieving enlightenment.
Right.
But Mara and similar figures are generally seen more as distractions, obstacles on the path. They often symbolize negative thoughts, emotions like greed, hatred, delusion, or psychological barriers like fear or anxiety, things you need to overcome within yourself.
So internal struggles personified.
Largely, yes. Not absolute external evil in the same sense. Hinduism is similar in a way. You have asuras, who often represent chaos or moral disorder, but even they aren't always purely evil. Sometimes they have redeeming qualities, or their actions are part of a larger cosmic cycle, a struggle between dharma order, righteousness, and adharma, which is chaos or unrighteousness. It's complex.
And are there more examples, maybe from other regions, of spirits that don't quite fit the purely evil mold? maybe protective ones or tricksters.
Oh, definitely. In many African traditional religions, for instance, you find spirits that might seem demonic from a Western lens but actually play protective roles in the community. Or you have trickster figures.
What a Nancy.
Exactly, like Anansi the spider in West African folklore. He uses cunning, sometimes deception, but often to teach moral lessons or reveal some deeper truth. He causes mischief, sure, but it often serves a purpose.
Interesting.
And in many indigenous cultures across the world, spirits are often seen as guardians of the land, of sacred places, or as ancestral guides. The Algonquin people, for example, have beliefs about spirits guiding individuals. It's a much more interwoven, often benevolent relationship than the strict adversarial one.
It's really striking just how vast the range of interpretation is globally.
Right.
But let's circle back to Europe. It feels like the medieval period really hammered home that fearful, unified image of the demon.
It absolutely did. That period saw a dramatic consolidation of the idea. With the rise and dominance of Christianity, demons became firmly, almost exclusively associated with absolute evil.
Okay.
The devil became the ultimate enemy, and demons were his foot soldiers, his minions, actively trying to corrupt humanity, drag souls to hell.
And this wasn't just theology, right? It had real-world impact.
Huge impact. This era produced a surge in demonology literature texts trying to classify demons, describe their powers. The most infamous is probably the Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of Witches, published in 1487.
Right, I've heard of that. Notorious.
Yeah, and incredibly dangerous. It basically provided a handbook for identifying and prosecuting witches, and it directly fueled the horrific witch hunts that swept across Europe. We're talking thousands, maybe tens of thousands of people, mostly women, accused and executed.
It's just awful.
And alongside this, exorcisms became much more formalized and common. Demonic possession was defined within this strict theological framework, which tragically often meant that people suffering from what we now understand as severe mental illness, epilepsy, psychosis, things like that, were seen as possessed.
Stigmatized and,
Yeah,
subjected to terrifying ordeals instead of getting help.
exactly. It was a devastating confusion of spiritual belief and untreated illness.
That really does sound like an incredibly dark and fearful time. What started to break that mold? What pulled us or started pulling us out of that very strict, very dangerous interpretation?
Well, the big shift really begins with the Enlightenment, kicking off in the 17th and gathering steam in the 18th century.
Reason takes center stage.
Precisely. This era championed rational thought, skepticism, empirical evidence. Thinkers like Voltaire, David Hume, they started seriously questioning supernatural explanations for things. They argued that natural phenomena, human behavior, could be understood through science and reason, not just divine will or, demonic meddling.
So less looking for demons under the bed, more looking for natural causes.
Exactly. This critical thinking led to a decline in the witch hunts, thankfully. Belief in demons and witchcraft started being seen as superstition, something to be examined critically, not accepted unquestioningly.
And this laid the groundwork for how many people think today?
Absolutely. The Enlightenment really paved the way for modern secularism, but also, crucially, for the psychological reinterpretation of these demonic experiences. It began the slow process of shifting the focus from external evil spirits to internal states of mind.
Okay, that provides a really clear historical path. Now let's switch gears a bit, but it's obviously connected. How did all these changing ideas, from nuanced spirits to absolute evil to internal states, actually show up in art and literature?
Yeah.
How did creators grapple with this?
So art and literature became amazing reflections and sometimes shapers of these beliefs. During the Renaissance, for instance, you get these incredibly vivid depictions. Think Hieronymus Bosch.
Oh yeah, the Garden of Earthly Delights. Unforgettable.
Right. Especially that right panel depicting hell. It's just teeming with these bizarre, grotesque demons inflicting all sorts of punishments. They're graphic symbols of vice, greed, lust, gluttony, and the terrifying consequences of giving in to them.
In Michelangelo, he tackled demons too, right?
Yeah, he did, famously in the Last Judgment on the Sistine Chapel's altar wall. His demons are maybe less surreal than Bosch's, but they're powerful. They're dragging the damned down to hell, acting as instruments of God's final justice. It's about theological order being restored.
Now, I remember reading in the material about a sculpture by Donatello, Judith, and Holofernes that offered a really different almost unsettling take. Not an external demon, but something else.
Yes, that's a fascinating one. Donatella's sculpture from the early 15th century, Judith has just beheaded the enemy general, Holofernes. And the way she's portrayed her intense focus, her unwavering, almost cold resolve in carrying out this incredibly violent act, some described it as having a demonic semblance.
So not possessed, but...
Not possessed, no. It's more like the demonic here refers to a kind of superhuman, almost frighteningly powerful determination within her. It's this inner strength, maybe bordering on ruthlessness, that allows her to do what needs to be done. It really challenges simple ideas about female weakness, or even simple moral categories. It hints at the complexities, the darker potentials within the human spirit itself.
Wow. That's, yeah, almost a glimpse into the psychological side we see later. What about literature? How did classic writers use demons?
Literature gives us some iconic examples. Dante's Inferno, of course. Lucifer isn't just some generic monster. He's trapped in ice at the very bottom of hell, chewing on the worst traitors. He represents the ultimate consequence of betrayal against God, but also embodies, pride, envy, this chilling desolation. It's a profound moral and psychological portrait.
And Faust. That's the classic deal with the devil story.
Exactly. Goethe's Faust uses the demon figure, Mephistopheles, to explore massive themes. Ambition, the limits of knowledge, the price of power. Mephistopheles isn't just evil. He's witty, cynical, almost a dark reflection of Faust's own desires. The supernatural pact becomes a vehicle for deep philosophical questions about human nature and morality.
So beyond these big allegorical figures like Lucifer or Mephistopheles, did certain individual demons develop their own distinct personalities and symbolism in folklore and texts?
Oh, absolutely. Several became quite famous, embodying specific concepts. Take Lilith.
Right, Adam's supposed first wife.
That's the story, yeah. Her roots might go back even further, maybe to Babylonian myths, but in Jewish folklore, particularly texts like the Alphabet of Ben Sira, she's portrayed as Adam's first wife who refused to be subservient to him, flew away, and became this mother of demons.
Wow.
So she evolves into this incredibly potent symbol, sometimes feared, sometimes reclaimed of female independence, rebellion against patriarchal structures, sexual autonomy, a really complex and enduring figure.
Definitely. Any others that stand out?
Well, there's Asmodeus. He shows up in the Book of Tobit, part of the Catholic and Orthodox Old Testament canons. He's often linked specifically with lust, gambling, and generally disrupting marriages and relationships. He becomes a symbol of destructive desires, the chaos that can erupt within intimacy.
Okay, the demon of bad relationships, basically.
Kind of, yeah. And then you have Beelzebub, whose name famously translates to Lord of the Flies.
Familiar.
His origins are probably in a Canaanite deity, Beelzebub, but in Christian demonology he becomes this high-ranking demon, often associated with, flies, decay, filth, disease, and pride. But interestingly, he gets a very sophisticated portrayal much later in Bulgakov's novel, The Master and Margarita, where he appears as Woland, a suave, powerful, and deeply critical observer of Soviet society's failings. It shows how even these figures can be used for sharp social commentary.
It's clear these figures aren't just monsters. They carry so much symbolic weight. How did philosophers, moving away from pure theology or folklore, start to tackle the ideas behind demons, the concepts of good and evil they represent?
That's where things get really interesting, because philosophers started internalizing the problem. Plato, for example, had this radical idea. He argued that evil isn't some external demonic force attacking us.
No. Then what is it?
It's basically a lack of something, a deficiency. It's ignorance, or a deviation from the ultimate good, which he called the form of the good. So acting morally comes from knowing the good, from reason and understanding. The battle isn't against demons outside, it's against ignorance inside.
That completely reframes it.
It really does. And the Stoics, thinkers like Marcus Aurelius or Epictetus, had a related view. For them, the only real good was virtue living according to reason and nature. Evil, then, wasn't a demonic power, but simply the failure to live virtuously. It arises from our own flawed judgments, uncontrolled desires, and irrational fears. Again, the focus is entirely internal.
So the demon becomes my own anger, my own ignorance, my own fear.
Exactly. These philosophical perspectives profoundly shifted the battleground inward and honestly still underpin a lot of modern ethical thinking, virtue ethics, ideas about emotional regulation, building resilience. It's about mastering oneself, not fighting external spirits.
Okay, so whether people saw these forces as external spirits or internal struggles, they've always looked for ways to deal with them, right? To protect themselves or expel them. What kinds of rituals emerged?
Yeah, the practical responses are fascinating. Exorcism is probably the most famous ritual, especially in Judeo-Christian traditions. It's seen as spiritual warfare, drawing on the authority Jesus demonstrated over evil spirits in the Gospels.
And there are specific prayers or objects used.
Oh, yes. The Prayer to St. Michael the Archangel is a very well-known Catholic prayer for protection against evil. And objects like the Benedictine medal, inscribed with Vad retro Satana, get behind me, Satan, are used as physical wards.
What about other faiths? How do they approach driving out negative influences?
In Islam, there's a practice called ruqya. It involves reciting specific verses from the Quran and making supplications, prayers, asking God for healing and protection from malevolent jinn, which are spirits that can be good, evil, or neutral. It's a spiritual healing practice.
And beyond formal exorcism, are there more everyday sort of folk magic type protections in different cultures?
Absolutely, tons of them. Think about Japanese culture. Salt is widely used for purification. Shinto priests use it, sumo wrestlers throw it in the ring, people might put small piles outside their homes or businesses to ward off bad luck or spirits.
Simple, but powerful symbolically.
Exactly. Fire is also big in Japanese purification rituals, like at festivals, the Hozuki-ichi Lantern Festival, or New Year bonfires meant to cleanse and protect. In many African cultures, you see the use of amulets, charms, protective symbols woven into cloth, or carved like insibidi symbols. And often, a traditional healer, like a sangoma in southern Africa, acts as a mediator, using rituals to diagnose problems caused by spirits and restore balance.
So these rituals are obviously deeply embedded in cultural beliefs.
Mm.
But as you mentioned with the Enlightenment, our understanding of the mind itself started changing dramatically.
Yeah.
How did psychology start to reinterpret experiences that were once labeled demonic possession?
Right. This is that crucial pivot point again. As we said, back in medieval times, mental health just wasn't understood. People suffering severe psychological distress were often thought to be afflicted by demons.
Yeah.
Then came Freud and psychoanalysis. Freud suggested, quite radically for his time, that these kinds of experiences, hearing voices, uncontrollable urges, what looked like possession, could actually be expressions of deeply repressed things, unconscious conflicts, maybe repressed sexual desires, trauma bubbling up in distorted ways.
So the demon was coming from within the psyche.
That was his idea, yeah. And later psychological approaches built on this, though moving away from Freud's specific theories. Cognitive behavioral therapy, for instance, might link such phenomena to severe anxiety, deep depression, PTSD, or psychosis, looking at distorted thought patterns, hallucinations, or delusions triggered by biological factors or extreme stress.
And now there's an even broader view, right? The biopsychosocial model.
Exactly. Modern psychology largely uses the biopsychosocial model. It understands that these experiences, which might look like possession, are likely the result of a really complex mix of factors, like biological things, maybe neurotransmitter imbalances, brain injury, genetics, psychological factors, trauma history, personality, coping mechanisms, and social or cultural factors, intense stress, social isolation, and crucially, the person's own cultural beliefs, which shape how they interpret and express their distress. It's rarely just one thing.
Okay, so we have these deeply rooted traditional beliefs and rituals on one hand and modern psychological and medical understandings on the other. What happens when those two clash in a real-life situation? It must be incredibly difficult.
It can be incredibly difficult and sometimes tragic. The case of Anneliese Michel in Germany in the 1970s, often called the Emily Rose case because of the movie, is probably the most famous example.
Right. What happened there?
She was diagnosed by doctors with epilepsy and later psychosis, but she and her family became convinced she was possessed by multiple demons. They stopped her medical treatment and relied solely on intensive, prolonged Catholic exorcism rites.
Oh, no.
Tragically, she died of malnutrition and dehydration. Her parents and the two priests who performed the exorcisms were later convicted of negligent homicide. It sparked this huge, painful public debate about faith healing versus medical responsibility, belief versus science, a really heartbreaking intersection.
Are there other examples, maybe on a larger scale?
Well, you sometimes see phenomena that look like mass hysteria, particularly in certain cultural contexts. There have been reports, for instance, from parts of rural India like Uttar Pradesh, of outbreaks where groups of people, often young women, suddenly exhibit similar symptoms, fainting, shaking, speaking uncontrollably, which get interpreted locally as mass demonic affliction. Psychologists might look at factors like extreme social stress, suggestibility, maybe underlying health issues. amplified by shared cultural beliefs and anxieties. It shows how powerful social and cultural context is in shaping these experiences, sometimes overshadowing potential medical explanations in the moment.
So how are we trying to navigate this better today, bridging that gap between belief and mental health care?
There's definitely a growing awareness of the need for sensitivity and collaboration. More mental health professionals recognize the importance of understanding a patient's cultural and spiritual background. There's advocacy for what's sometimes called a dual approach, meaning, where appropriate and safe, potentially combining traditional or spiritual support, which might be deeply meaningful to the person, with evidence-based psychological or psychiatric treatment. Interfaith dialogues are also happening, trying to build bridges between religious communities and mental health science.
So respecting beliefs while ensuring proper care.
Exactly. It's about cultural humility in mental health care, not dismissing beliefs outright, but understanding their significance for the patient, involving family or community if that's helpful, and integrating these elements into a holistic treatment plan that prioritizes the person's well-being.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, shifting to the present day, maybe even the future. Demons seem to be everywhere in popular culture. Movies, TV shows, games. How is modern media shaping how we think about them now?
Oh, media influence is massive, you're right. Horror films especially. Think about The Exorcist back in '73. That movie had a huge cultural impact, terrifying audiences and making exorcism a mainstream topic.
Totally.
And more recently, you have franchises like The Conjuring. These films are incredibly effective at tapping into those primal fears, fear of the unknown, loss of control, the invasion of the home. They definitely keep public interest high, but they also tend to sensationalize and, let's be honest, distort the realities of both mental illness and actual religious practices like exorcism. It creates a very specific, often quite dramatic image in the public mind.
You know, social media throws another layer onto that, right?
Yeah.
Things can spread like wildfire.
Absolutely. Platforms like TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, they're hotspots for this stuff. You have people sharing personal stories, alleged paranormal experiences, sometimes dramatized accounts of possession or encounters.
These can go viral.
Easily. Which, on one hand, can normalize conversations about things that used to be hidden or taboo, but on the other hand, it's fertile ground for misinformation and sensationalism. Remember the creepy clown sightings that spread panic a few years back?
Oh yeah, that was weirdly unsettling.
Right, largely fueled by social media posts blurring fiction and reality. It shows how quickly collective anxieties can latch onto these kinds of narratives online. The psychological impact is real. It can amplify fears, create echo chambers where extreme interpretations get reinforced, and make it harder to discern credible information.
So lots of sensationalism, but isn't there also a different trend in modern spirituality, something more introspective, that reinterprets demons in a totally different way?
Yes, definitely. Within many New Age and contemporary spiritual movements, there's been a significant shift away from viewing demons as external malevolent entities.
So what are they then, in that view?
Often they're interpreted as manifestations of negative energy or perhaps unresolved emotional states. They become symbols for inner turmoil, deep-seated anger, fear, trauma, negative self-talk. Your personal demons, quite literally.
Like the Jungian shadow.
Very much aligned with that, yes. Carl Jung's idea of the shadow, the unconscious, repressed parts of ourselves that we need to confront and integrate. So the goal isn't exorcism in the old sense, but self-awareness, healing, and integration. It's about confronting these inner demons as part of a journey towards wholeness and self-improvement.
And do they have rituals for that too? Different kinds of protection?
They do, but they're usually focused on internal resilience and energy work. Things like invoking spiritual guides or angels for protection, using crystals. Amethyst is popular for spiritual protection. Black tourmaline for grounding negative energy, practicing visualization techniques, using affirmations to build mental strength. It's much more focused on managing one's own energy and psychological state.
It's fascinating how these ideas keep evolving: external threats becoming internal battles, ancient fears getting remixed with modern psychology and tech. Even paranormal investigation seems caught up in this blend of old and new.
It really is. The whole field of paranormal investigation has exploded, largely thanks to TV shows like Ghost Hunters, and now countless YouTube channels and social media groups.
And they try to use tech, right, to find evidence.
Yeah, there's definitely an attempt, or at least the appearance of an attempt, to apply scientific-ish methods, using EMF meters to detect electromagnetic fields, infrared cameras, sensitive audio recorders to capture EVPs. Electronic voice phenomena.
Trying to find objective proof for the subjective experience.
Exactly. And now we're even starting to see newer technologies like AI being used to analyze data, or VR and AR creating more immersive ghost hunting experiences. It constantly pushes at that boundary between what we can measure and what remains unexplained, blurring the lines between investigation, entertainment, and genuine belief.
Wow. Okay, what a journey we've taken.
Yeah.
Seriously, from ancient Mesopotamian spirits that weren't necessarily evil to the rigid dogma of medieval witch hunts,
Hmm.
through philosophical reframing, psychological interpretations, and now landing in the middle of TikTok trends and New Age shadow work. Our ideas about demons really do seem to mirror humanity's own fears, our hopes, and how we try to make sense of the unknown, both outside and inside ourselves.
Indeed. It's been quite the ride. We've seen how these concepts of good and evil get tangled up, how external threats can morph into deeply personal internal battles, and how every culture, every era, seems to reinterpret these powerful archetypes to reflect its own anxieties, its own search for meaning and control.
Yeah.
Which really brings us to a final thought, something for you, the listener, to maybe mull over.
Right.
In a world that, let's face it, still feels full of chaos sometimes, full of complex moral questions, and where mental health challenges are so incredibly real and widespread, what if the most powerful way we confront demons today isn't just about rituals to ward off some external evil, but it's actually about the difficult ongoing work of understanding, confronting, and maybe even integrating those demonic aspects, the shadows, the fears, the unresolved conflicts within ourselves and within our shared human experience? What does that look like?